you for joining us in the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Today, we have our special guest, Marcio Silva, who will discuss the subject of our important choices to suffer well or badly. A relevant topic at any time, but certainly in this era that we're in. But before we turn it over to Marcio, let's do our opening prayer. I ask, if you can, to please close your eyes. Let us elevate our thoughts. We thank you, dear God. We thank you, dear Jesus, for your guidance. We thank you for the opportunities we have each and every day to grow and to learn, that every moment we go through in life is an opportunity to understand where we are and who we are. May we do our best each and every day to be surrounded by the light and love of your grace. Please bless this palestra, this lecture, and please bless all who are in harmony. Amen. And now, let's introduce Marcio Silva. Hi, Marcio. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and you, Peter?
Good. Doing very well. Welcome. I'd like
Thank you.
to once again thank the U.S. Spiritist Federation for supporting this program, and also to the International Spiritist Council for allowing this program to be broadcast on its YouTube channel as well. Before Marcio brings his words of teaching to us, please allow me to introduce him more formally. Marcio Silva has been studying Spiritism for more than 10 years, actively working at Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center of Orlando, PKSCO, presenting lectures and studies, and he is also on its fraternal counseling team. Marcio is a Navy officer veteran, and he has 2 master's degrees, one with distinction in telecommunications engineering from Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and the other one in computer engineering from Universidade de São Paulo Escola Politécnica, or University of São Paulo Polytechnic School. Thank you for being here, Marcio. Remember, everyone, to please send in your questions, because we will open for questions after his talk. Marcio, if you would, please.
Appreciate that, Peter. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and let me express my gratitude to the United States Spiritist Federation for the opportunity to present this important topic here today and bring us to reflection in this nice and beautiful Saturday. So let's start our Saturday with this reflection. Let me bring my deck here. Hope everybody can see the deck. So suffer well or badly. So that's a topic that every time we are facing suffering or pain, we used to concentrate in the suffering itself or the pain, and sometimes does not make room for us to reflect on why I'm suffering, the reason I'm suffering, and how can I supersede this suffering and go to the next stage of the life. So the idea here is to bring this reflection enlightened by the Spiritism. And the main reference for us today is the Gospel according to Spiritism, mainly in the chapter 5. So we can see here in this sentence from Kardec that it's giving a tip to us when we are facing sufferings or pain. So the idea is that we should be able to place ourselves above the situation. Place ourselves above the situation, which means think out of the box by managing the impulses of impatience, anger, and despair. Look at that, managing the impulses of impatience, anger, and despair. How can we manage that? So that's the idea for today: is how can we manage, how can we place above, and how can we manage this impulse? Because at the end, when we supersede the 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 suffering, we can say to ourselves, I was stronger. So that's the idea of this reflection today. And of course, we've got about less than an hour to discuss, and I will present also the references for this reflection in case someone would like to go further, or to try to study additional details on the today's topic. So the main reference for today is a book from Divaldo Franco. Divaldo Franco is one of the main mediums, I would say, not only in Brazil but in the world. And after Chico Xavier, he is the main one right now. And he has a good series, very very interesting series about psychological studies along with the Spiritism. And one of these books is Self Discovery, Inner Search by Joana de Angeli. Joana is fantastic on presenting psychological reflections aligned with the gospel, with Jesus' message, and the spirited concept. So I would recommend, if you have the opportunity to read this book. This book is fantastic. The other two ones, of course, when we talk about spiritism, we should not dismiss the basic books from Kardec. And as I said, the main one for today would be the Gospel according to Spiritism, in mainly in the chapter 5, where we discuss blessed are the afflicted, or blessed are the ones who is suffering some kind of pain. And the Spirit's book, it's the basic for all discussions when related to Spiritism. So Kardec introduced it to us the topics about how can we spiritually evolve, and categorize our evolution in terms of the infinity life of the soul. Okay, so I would recommend. So once again, if you got a chance, try to read this book from Divaldo. That's a great opportunity to better understand the suffering. Okay, so moving forward, so let's understand the context of the suffering. So we can see here that our earth, our home, our current home, so the earth suffered a lot to reach the stage that we have right now. It's so beautiful place. We've got some problems for sure. We've got suffering for sure as well. But we can see here that the earth suffered a lot to evolve in terms of a material thing. That's pretty natural. That's pretty natural. So it's not only happened with Earth, but other planets as well. And so why we need to understand this context here? Because the Earth is in a process of evoluting, right? Is in a process of development. And this development, as we can see here, Kardec brought to us this classification in the chapter 3 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, item 4. And we can see here that it's a one-way direction. So the word was created, the word became a primitive one where it received the initial incarnations of the souls. And then the next phase of this development is the phase of tests and atonements. That's exactly the phase that we are facing on earth right now, where evil predominates. We can perceive that thing. We can perceive that, not only because the news, it's not a good bias for that thing, but we perceive that the evil predominates here on earth. But we are getting better. We are getting much better. If we move back 200 years ago, slavery was something that was natural. Right now, we do not support slavery at all. So we are getting better. We are getting better. So believe me, and believe in what Kardec mentioned to us, right? So, and this one way presented by this arrow here is the way that we are following. But to go in this direction, the next phase will be a regenerating world where the situation will be much better in terms of a much better balance between the evil and the goodness. The next stage will be the blessed world where the goodness supersede the evil, and then the divine where we're going to have only goodness in our planet. So right now, to go to this direction is very dependent on the inhabitants of this planet, right? And that's our work here, is to co-create, is to help God in this co-creation of the world, of a divine world. So it's depending only in our efforts. And our efforts will be compensated by a regenerated world, then a blessed world, and then a divine world. So that's the context that we need to understand because, as I said before, we are going to help God on this creation by also improving our our uh, spiritual characteristics, right? So this will interfere in the psychosphere of the planet. So as we improve, we will improve the psychosphere, and then the world could move forward in this development way. So here, the same way, there's no way back. There's no way back. So the spirit starts with an imperfect one, right? Where we didn't know so much. We are going to make a lot of mistakes, and we're going to compensate the mistakes in the later incarnations, and so on until we become good spirits, right? And then after good spirits, we are going to become pure spirits. So this is pretty aligned to the development of the planet that we are living. So if we are good spirits and we are going to incarnate in another world, not on Earth, but we are going to incarnate in a in a in a more developed world, if I can say that. So why I'm talking about this? Why I'm talking about the Earth evolution, uh, our evolution as spirits? Because to evolve, we need to understand that the suffering is a natural occurrence in the evolutionary process that we are facing as spirits. So it's a challenge to our resistance. So it's like a gem. A gem, if you know a gem, it's like a rock. But to become a pure gem, a beautiful gem, it needs to polish, it needs to suffer some kind of friction to become a gem. So the same way for us. We start like a rocket, like a pure rock. And at the end, because of the suffering, we're going to be polished. We're going to be polished, and this will promote to us an intellectual and moral improvement. So not only the moral is important for the spirit, but the intellectual one, right? Sometimes we think about only improving intellectually, but we forget about the moral one. And the moral one should become, the moral improvement should be aligned with the intellectual one. Then we become better spirits in the spiritual evolution. And the sensitivity to pain, it's highly dependent on the spiritual evolutionary stage. Okay? So, of course, along with a higher consciousness level. So, as much as we evaluate in our scale, become good spirits, we can support the pain and the suffering. Jesus gave to us this example. So, he suffered a lot and he was able to support the suffering because he's a pure spirit, right? So, we need to understand that basically it's suffering is a natural occurrence. It's necessary for our spiritual evolution, for our spiritual development. And suffering is a real example of cause and effect law. So the suffering is an effect of something, right? And the suffering could be a cause for another issue or another suffering. But let's concentrate. When we think about suffering, we are just thinking most of the time in the effect. What we are bringing here today is let's think about the cause. How can we fix the cause and the cause will not repeat again? And then we can suffer again by another reason, but not by the same reason. So if we understand the cause and effect law, then we can understand that the suffering is basically an effect. And there is at least one cause, could be in this incarnation. Most of them is in the current incarnation, but maybe we have some compensating to promote because we are in debit from previous incarnations. So let's just review here. Suffering is a natural thing, and it's a practical example of the cause and effect law. Cause and effect law. So let me bring that thing because as an engineer, I like to break the stuffs to better understand. So we just mentioned about suffering as an effect, right? So no questions about that. And if it's an effect, we know there is a cause. Let me use the Ishigawa or the fishbone diagram to help us on break down this thing. So let's break down the causes, or as Joana de Angelis like to say, the suffering aspects is the way that we can classify. So this fishbone diagram or the Ishigawa diagram, it came from the quality control. So in a manufacturing industry, so if you've got a piece with a defect, you need to identify what are the potential causes that generated this defect. And this defect could be fixed by fixing the cause. So it's the same idea here, same idea that we are going to promote here. How can we break down the suffering? So let's see what Joanna mentioned. What could be the potential causes of the suffering? The potential causes by the suffering classified by Joanna in the self-discovery book basically are the physical aspect, the moral aspect, the emotional one, and the spiritual one. Okay, they could be interconnected, of course, because they are all correlated to each other. But if we break down and we understand the physical one, what we should do in this physical aspect, what we should do in the moral aspect, what we should do in the emotional one, and what we should do in the spiritual one, we can suffer well. We can suffer in a better way than only concentrating in the suffering itself, right? So let's discuss each one of those aspects here. Okay, let's start with the physical one. The physical one. The physical one. It's the origin is a degenerative process of our cells and the psychological organization. Okay, so could degenerate, and here we can see here the DNA, right? The DNA is our inherited, what we inherited. It's something that we inherited from our parents, and it's coming from the incarnation preparation, the incarnation planning. In our incarnation planning, so the let's say the our spirits that support us in our incarnation, like an engineer, they prepare our DNA for what we need to face in the incarnation, right? Okay, it could be from a reincarnation planning as being presented here, or due to mistakes regarding the maintenance of our body. So I give an example. If you're a smoker, So you start to smoke in this incarnation, so probably you're going to suffer a physical situation because of the smoking. So that's one example. So if you didn't treat well the body, probably you're going to suffer. So not everything is coming from a previous planning for your incarnation. And how can we deal with this suffering related to the physical? Basically, of course, medical treatment. The Spiritism will not tell you that give up about the medical treatment and concentrate in something different. No, the Spiritism supports the medical treatment. The medical treatment it's important, and here is the doctor, and the doctor will prescribe medicine or prescribe a treatment for you to follow and then to compensate. But the Spiritism also teach you that the action of the mind on the body can also help the treatment. We've got a lot of examples, and so if I'm asking any of you about give me an example that someone was suffering and in a very tough treatment, but it start to pray, it start to practice the faith. It helped the improvement. It helped a lot the improvement. So resignation and positive thinking, that's the key when we start to make the action of the mind on the body. Another example is that an athlete, an Olympics athlete. So for sure, the Olympics sometimes they receive a gold medal, but you don't know anything about their pain in the back, and probably they are competing in the Olympics with a lot of pain, but they supersede the pain using what? Not only the medical treatment, but also a positive thinking that he's capable and supersede the pain or the suffering to reach the target. And for us, our target is a spiritual development, evolution. So, and then if we think about, we are uh, a mortal spirit, right? That we are going to suffer sometimes, but the suffering is for our spiritual development. If you change your mind to that thing, you can turn your switch into a positive thinking, and this positive thinking will help a lot in terms of reducing the not reducing the suffering, but uh, trying to give you a strength to supersede the suffering. Okay. The next aspect or the next group of causes for the suffering is the moral one. And the moral one, the origin is when we make mistakes before the moral laws or the divine laws. Divine laws are the God's law, right? And I would not go into details to each of the 10 laws here. So I would suggest if someone is interested on that, the part three of the Spirit's book, Kardec presented in a very detailed situation. But the 10 moral laws, as we can see here, the adoration, labor, reproduction, preservation, destruction, social or society, progressy, progress, equality, or liberty, all of them embraced by the law of justice, love, and charity. So they constitute the moral laws. So if we make mistakes against those laws, so probably we are gonna suffer some kind of a moral cause, okay? Because we make mistakes, right? And then, okay, let's try to compensate those mistakes. Some of the this moral could be a consequence of a previous incarnation or in the current one, right? So talking about the moral laws again, this is it's a beautiful topic to study, and if we start to discuss about moral laws, probably it will take a conference or maybe a workshop just to discuss each one of them. So I would suggest that take a look into those laws, understand them, then you can understand what kind, when you start to, oh, I'm suffering right now, why I'm suffering. Is there any law that I made a mistake against? And then you can identify. And then you can also fix or compensate this mistake by understanding the law, right? That's what is being presented here in the third bullet here. So how can we work with the oops how can we work with that? So rationalization, understand what I said. It's understand the law, what you did against that law, and how can you compensate that thing. Self-knowledge, it's very important, self-knowledge, because self-knowledge will bring to us, will raise to us what I did wrong. Is this something that it's is natural, is coming from my inside, that I need to understand why I'm doing that thing on a frequent basis. So how can I avoid that thing on a frequent basis? How can I fix that thing? So self-knowledge is a is key for the understanding of the moral causes. Okay, an effort also in the goodness direction. So if you perform an effort, a moral effort in the goodness direction, for sure that will compensate the moral cause of the suffering. And one of the main topics as well is self forgiveness. So, forgiveness, I'm saying forgive yourself. Because if you are not capable of forgiving yourself, it's going to be tough to forgive any other one. So, self forgiveness, it's something very important. And how can we promote the self forgiveness? The self forgiveness is understanding that we are an spirit in an evolutionary process and we are going to make mistakes, but the mistakes should be some kind compensated or fixed. So how can we fix? That's what being presented by a self-forgiveness is understanding why I did this mistake and understanding how can I do not repeat this mistake, right? Move forward. You cannot go back and make a new present, but we are always capable on promoting a new future, right? So self forgiveness is also key for the moral cause of any suffering. Okay, the third one is emotional. Emotional, it's coming from psychological disorders that will reflect in our emotions. The same way as we presented for the for the moral causes, the moral aspects, it could come from a previous incarnation, and most of them are coming from this incarnation. And this incarnation could be a consequence of a trauma, right? So that's an important thing. Sometimes we suffer a trauma. So a lot of examples about a car accident, or if you've been in a war, or when you were a kid, you could face some kind of bullying. This could cause you a trauma, and this trauma will reflect in your psychological aspect, and this will promote a psychological disorder, and this will reflect in your emotions that could cause you a suffering. So the way that we are gonna handle that thing is, of course, through an appropriate psychological or even psychiatric treatment and rationalization, understanding. So why I'm facing that thing right now? This should be a previous incarnation. This one, what I should learn from that. So give you a lime, prepare a lemonade. So the lime is the suffering. Prepare the lemonade with that by understanding why I'm suffering. And once again, self-knowledge. So self-knowledge it's an important thing. For example, a kid that is bullying each other at school, right? The kid in the future, probably he will face emotional problems, emotional disorders, because he didn't work on why I'm bullying the other guy, why I'm bullying the other kid. I'm jealousy about him. So what's going on for him? He should treat that thing, right? And this could cause an emotional disorder in the future. So self knowledge is important even in the young ages. And the fourth one is the spiritual, right? The spiritual is where the spiritists put a light on that, right? It helps us a lot on dealing with spiritual causes of the suffering, because uh, this type of suffering arises from disturbances of the incarnated spirit, the soul, right? In relationship with other spirits. Sometimes it's could be a, a spirit that you had a relationship in the past lives, or could be a spirit that you are make some kind of relationship in this current life, right? So it could be in past incarnations on the current one, and it requires a spiritual treatment for that. So I'm working in the fraternal counseling, and that's an example how the spirit team can help this type of suffering. So to understanding if it's an obsession, if it's something between your spirit and another spirit, some kind of friction that you might have, the lack of empathy, or something that you need to face in order to compensate something from a previous life, right? Self knowledge. So we can see here that self knowledge is key for most of the sufferings. So the physical one, sometimes it's a fatality. You cannot. It's the self knowledge will not help so much. But for the other three ones, for the moral one, for the emotional one, and the spiritual one, self knowledge is key. So we need to deep dive in ourselves to understand why I'm suffering. So why I'm playing like that, why I'm acting like that, right? And this will probably will enlighten us on in terms of, oh, this is the cause. Let me treat that cause to not suffer anymore. And source rationalization. We can see here the source rationalization is to understand if it's coming from our own spirit, it's a self obsession, as we can say that, or if it's originated in the relationship with another spirit, so that you are brought together to this life to compensate some mistaken or some kind of an issue that you both could have in the past life. So when I said the spiritual cause, so as I said, if you deep dive in the spiritist doctrine that promotes this understanding, that's the beauty of the spiritism, is because it promotes the study, it promotes the understanding. And when you deep dive in the spiritism and you start to study and you start to understand why I'm doing that thing right now, why I'm here, why I'm facing that thing, that will help you a lot, not only in the spiritual cause as we presented, but in the other ones as well, right? So once again, the four. So we break down the suffering into four aspects. The four aspects: physical one, moral one, emotional one, and a spiritual. Of course, sometimes and most of the times, they are not playing alone. They are playing integrated to each other. But we can't treat them in a separate way, right? If we treat them in a separate way, probably it will be effective in terms of well suffering. Okay. So now Marcio, good. You presented me how we break down the suffering. I can understand the causes, but how can I exercise a well suffering? Because a well suffering means understanding the suffering and promoting this, using the suffering to develop your spiritual life, right? And bad suffering means what? That you are still tied to the effect. Oh, I'm suffering, complaining, but not thinking about the cause. So, well suffering is basically understanding the suffering and how can you use that suffering to promote your spiritual life. So, let's exercise the well suffering. How can we exercise it? First of all, as I mentioned uh, 10 times in this presentation, self knowledge, know thyself, right? Understanding the causes of the suffering and using this understanding to do our part righteously in a right way, right? The self knowledge will promote also an intimate renewal and balance. And someone could raise a hand and ask for, Martial, self knowledge is quite difficult, it's quite tough. I would say that self knowledge is a label one. If we go to the question 919A of the Spirit's book, where Saint Augustine present to us a methodology for self knowledge, where every day before you go into bed, before you go into sleep, just think about what you did in the day. And what you did in the day, if you if someone did it to you, how would you feel with that? So that's a good tip. If you go to question 919A in the Spirit's book, you're going to see that this tip from St. Augustine that will help you on knowing yourself. So, and it's a pretty simple tip. Just before going to sleep, think about what you did during the day. What you did during the day was right. So, how was the other person? How the other person feel about your actions against him or her? So, that's a key for us to understanding the suffering and practice the well suffering. Because we know at the end that the energy generated by a peaceful mind, so if you are in peace, so this will relieve your suffering. How many people we know that are in the hospital but they are suffering, but they are suffering well without any complaints, and this will become a calm, so the environment will become helpful for the treatment, right? Another topic that we can exercise the well suffering and practicing love and charity. Love the agape one. So align it with the charity. And the message for that is the message that Jesus brought to us is that love your neighbor as yourself, right? A health conduct with respect for others and life. So it's aligned to what St. Augustine mentioned in the question 919A. So think about what you did to others. Think about if others did the same to you. How do you feel with that? So, and then you fix and then you improve, right? So, if we practice love and charity, love our neighbor like we love ourselves, so we are practice charity in the pure sense. And this will also help us in a well suffering, right? Another way to exercise the well suffering, and once again, that's the beauty of the Spiritism that I like so much because it makes totally sense for me. It's a reason of faith, right? The reason of faith is that understanding what's going on with me, what I'm doing here, what I did, right? And what I should not did in the future to repeat this suffering, right? Trusting God. So it gives us the trust in God because God is good and just. He will not give you a higher level of suffering, and for the other one, oh no, this guy is not suffering so much. No, no. The evolutionary process is the same for everyone. But if you understand this evolutionary process and the need of suffering, maybe your level of suffering will be reduced. And then you're going to be an example to others. Oh, this person is suffering a lot, but look at that. The humor is good. He's also, it seems, happy all the time. He didn't practice the bad suffering, right? So, and we can do that thing by thinking positive, correct channeling of thought, right? Rationalization and suffering acceptance as a transitionary process of our evolution. So it's transition. Chico Xavier, which is our good reference in the Spiritism, Chico Xavier, he had a sign close to his bed, and this sign was presenting, "This will pass," right? Why of that? Because if you are suffering a lot, if you look to this sign, this will pass. There will be a deadline for that. So sometimes we used to extend the deadline because we are concentrating in the effect. And then the suffering, the deadline will be extended for a long time. And also, this phrase is when you're facing good moments, you should remember that the good moments are temporary. You need to be prepared for the storm, right? So this phrase that Chico had in his bedroom is a key for us to understand that the correct channeling of thought, right? Because the suffering has a deadline, believe me. So, patience. Sometimes we are very anxious on getting rid of the suffering, and this could cause an anxiety, right? And sometimes the suffering is for us to practice patience, right? We need to be patient. We need to understand God's timing. We need to keep the faith in God. Understand that God is presenting that situation to us for our best way to improve, right? It's not to punish us, it's to raise a flag to us. Look at that. That's the way you need to improve. You need to face that suffering and then you move forward, right? So patience is key. So, and patience is basically believe in God's timing. He knows exactly when is the deadline. He knows exactly why are you suffering that, right? Let's review the four topics. First one is the first topics to exercise the well suffering. First one is self knowledge. Second one, love and charity all the time. So reasoned faith, understanding why I'm here, why I'm suffering here, and exercising patience, believe in God's timing. And let's see this message from Joana de Angelis. Joana de Angelis brought this message in the book Happy Life. So look at that. Look at how Joanna is straight to the point. Bless each evolutionary opportunity with joy, and suffering is an evolutionary opportunity. The suffering faced with resignation decreases in intensity as it passes faster when it's born in silence. Exactly what we talked in the previous, how we exercise the the well suffering, right? Resignation, understanding, it passes faster. The deadline will be shortened when we support that thing in silence, when we born in silence. We never face the sufferings that we do not deserve. Look at that, that's important. So there's no punishment. We deserve to cross this suffering. The same way, we'll not stay on earth in an exception condition without facing them. So we are not different to each other. So the level of suffering is depending on each one of us, right? Don't think that the other one is suffering less than you. So he's suffering what he deserves to suffer. Because God's law are the same for everyone. The moral laws are the same for everyone, and they are permanent. It doesn't matter about the politics and the political situation, the justice and so on. The divine laws are forever. Replace the scarce love, the lack of love. Suffering is the master that drives the spiritual evolution. So we discussed that thing. So if we understand that, we can, as I said, get the lime and prepare a lemonade. So you're suffering. So you created that suffering, or the suffering came to you. Use that suffering on your benefit and understand that it's necessary for your spiritual evolution. Right? Beautiful. I like this message from Joanna because she's pretty straight on the point and she summarized everything that we reflected today. So another thing that we need to keep in mind. So it's in chapter 5, item 18. So God has often told us that he does not place heavy burdens on weak shoulders. If you think that the suffering is too much, believe in God that he will not put a heavy burden on your shoulder. You are capable to supersede the suffering. And the burden is proportional to the strength, to our effort. And the reward will be to resignation and courage. Right? If we could summarize, I think that's the message for suffering. When you facing a suffering time, think about that. Believe in God. And also bring John 16:33. So what Jesus told to the disciples. I have told you this thing so that in me you may have peace. Look at that. Go to his message, go to Jesus' message. You may have peace on that thing if you understand that. In this world, you have trouble. So Jesus mentioned to all of us that you have trouble, you have pain because it's needed. But take heart, believe in God. I have overcome the world. So that's the beauty. So if we keep those messages in mind every time we face a suffering and practice with the tips that were reflected today, probably the suffering will be managed as we presented in the first slide. So you can manage the anger, the impatience to supersede the suffering. So hope that this reflection help us on understanding better the suffering situations and how can we handle and take another light to suffering, understanding that it's something that it's a natural process for our evolutionary spirits. So thank you for the opportunity to bring this message today and hope this help you as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for a very inspiring lecture. All of it was wonderful. I really like that quote from Happy Life, chapter 72. That's a great one to reflect on.
Thank you.
So we have some questions.
Mhm.
First one. This is from Daniel Santos. Are there any other ways to spiritually grow without the suffering process?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Daniel, for this question. Of course. So, suffering is one part of that, but a spiritual one is understanding why we are here, right? Practicing
Yes.
goodness through the heart. So, that's another way that we can improve as a spirit, right? Suffering, it's needed because we are trying to compensate something that we did bad, but it's not the only way to improve, to spiritually improve. So if we understand the spiritual life by studying, for example, if you understand that our soul is infinite, it's not it's not temporary. So we are not incarnated for just one incarnation, right? We are going to have a lot of incarnations to evolve and to practice our love, to practice the charity. Because Paul, the apostle, he brought to us, without charity there is no salvation. What does he mean with that? The charity is the salvation means that spiritual evolution. So if you don't practice the charity, there is no way to improve the spiritual condition. So another way is to practicing charity, right? And suffering is like a shake that God is giving to us. Shake. Wake up. Wake up. Try to fix something is wrong. Something is not well working. Fix it because you're gonna move away. So there's a lot of other options to improve in the spiritual way, right?
Thank you. Next question. This is from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. How much do we cause our own suffering, and how much does suffering occur in our lives regardless of what we have done in the past or now?
Yeah, that's a good question. To quantify that thing, it's not so simple. It depends on each one of us. But most of the sufferings are caused in the current incarnation. If we put in numbers, because I'm engineer, so I like to put in numbers, I would say 70% of the sufferings or more than that are caused by the current incarnation. Because when we incarnated, we prepare our planning with the incarnation planning with our mentors. Usually you accept that kind of suffering. So probably it's going to be one or two or three. I don't know exactly because it depends on each one. But most of the suffering that we are facing now, it's caused in the current incarnation because of our free will, right? Our free will could deviate our original planning, and that could cause additional sufferings or additional tests or additional atonements, right? And that's the point. We cannot quantify, but for sure, the majority of the sufferings that we are facing, if we think about the causes, we are going to identify as in the current incarnation, for sure, the majority of them.
This question from Freddie Ricardo. Actually, there's some connections here. Question.
Mhm.
Are the reincarnations already prepared beforehand, just before we disincarnate the physical body? The planning for your next incarnation while you're still here?
Yeah, reincarnation planning. It's something. Once again, it depends. There's no specific rule that will say that you're gonna start your planning right after you disincarnate. So it depends on the situation, how your consciousness will be after life, after the incarnated life, and how you're going to work with your mentors, how you're going to recognize, how you're going to put your pride aside and understand what you did wrong, and how can you compensate what you did wrong in a new incarnation, right? It's a complex planning. So there are some books explaining that thing. So the Sigismundo reincarnation is one topic. If you make a search about the Sigismundo reincarnation, you're gonna understand the engineering behind of the incarnation, all the planning. So some kind of disease that you're gonna be having this incarnation could be prepared in your DNA. So in your engineering, when you're planning this incarnation. So the reincarnation planning could start right after you disincarnate, but it could last for a long time. It depends on your consciousness or on your required to incarnate again, because sometimes you disincarnate and you've got no idea what's going on. First of all, you need to understand what's going on. I'm disincarnated and I'm facing here. So you blame yourself. You don't know how to forgive yourself. You need to work to forgive yourself and then prepare the planning, and then you can reincarnate again, right? With the planning, the planet's sufferings that you could face during the life. But once again, God is fantastic. He always give you a chance for, okay, I can change the planning. Yeah, you can change the planning by your free will, and then you're going to face new experiences, right? So the planning is a planning. So it's not the execution. The execution is depending on different factors at all. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This question is from the International Spiritist Council.
Yeah.
How should we react to those who frequently complain about their own suffering?
Yeah, that's what we face. I'm working in the fraternal counseling, and we face that thing. We face this topic all the time, right? First of all, we need to understand the cause of the suffering. Why are you suffering? Is in relationship to another person, is in relationship to you, something that you did not forgive yourself, that you made wrong. So, what I can say is that discuss with the person, try to understand the cause. And how can spiritism, like I would say about the fraternal counseling, how can spiritism could help the person in terms of a well suffering, right? Not a bad suffering, not to keep tied to the suffering. So try to identify with this person, why are you suffering? So are you suffering because of any of the four aspects that we discussed? So it could be a moral one, could be emotional one, could be a physical one, or could be a spiritual one. Try to identify. So once you identify the cause, try to attack the cause. And the attack the cause, if you see most of the cause will converge in the self-knowledge. So practice the self-knowledge, understand what's going on with you, understand that we are spirits, immortal spirits, understand that the suffering will have a deadline, and this deadline is depending on not only the treatment but also from your mind. What are you thinking about? Are you tied to the consequence, to the effect, which is the suffering, or you would like to understand the causes? So the way that we practice in the fraternal counseling, it's helping them to understand the cause, and then let's treat the cause, right? And then once we treat the cause, we can move forward with their suffering, right? Fraternal counseling, I think most of the spiritist centers, they have a team for fraternal counseling,
Yes.
and, and there's a good support for
Yeah.
them.
Very good advice and something a lot of Spiritist centers do. Okay, we have another question from Freddie Ricardo. As Spiritists, we have this kind of knot, but what about those who don't have it?
Yeah, for those who don't have it, the life some way will teach them. As we said, as we said in this reflection, we are all spirits in a temporary incarnated life. So if he doesn't want to understand that suffering is a is a temporary thing, In the next incarnation, he will plan to understand that, and so on and so on. That's the beauty of the incarnation. The reincarnation is the example of the God's justice, because it always gives you a chance to understand. And what you say about those who don't have this knowledge, right? So if they ask to us, we can explain to them in a logical way. So the Spiritism gives us the material and the tools to help someone to understand that thing. So you cannot force them to understand, but if he is interested on understanding that thing, the Spiritism will give them this capacity to learn, and then, as we said, suffering or spiritual evolution, not suffering, the spiritual evolution. It goes in parallel with the moral evolution, intellectual evolution. You cannot only uh, develop your moral without the intellectual thing, because it's gonna at the end will miss something for you to move forward. Then you need to improve intellectually. You need to study. You need to understand, and then you understand, and then you move on the moral and the intellectual thing. So the suggestion for the one that don't have this knowledge is that try to gather this knowledge. And the Spiritism, it's one way. You've got other ways to get this knowledge, but the Spiritism, you've got a lot of references and books and study groups, lectures. So there's no single rule to indicate to them, but try to gather the knowledge somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, another question from the U.S. Spiritist
Hmm.
Federation.
Hmm.
How much can prayer help us to cope with suffering?
A lot, because the prayer is our connection to our mentors, right? And our mentors are connected to God. And so, in other ways, we are connecting to God. And our prayer, we are going to ask them to support us, give us courage, give us strength, give us patience to support the suffering. So, give me support on that thing. And of course, the prayer is our connection, is our faith being expressed in energy. And this energy will be received by our mentors, and then our mentors will do whatever it's possible to help us. We are not alone. And the prayer is exactly to prove you that you're not alone, because you're going to talk to someone. It's not a repetitive words. It's not just getting uh, our Lord and blah 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 and say the repetitive words. It's a prayer coming from inside, from your heart, like you are talking to a friend, and you are asking this friend, please support me on that thing. It's been hard for me to support the suffering. Please help me. Give me a light. So it's asking and being open to receive that light, right? So a prayer is key, of course, to support, because it's your connection to your mentors, spiritual mentors, for sure.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question. This one is also from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Why are we told that forgetting the past is useful to overcoming suffering?
Yes. So forgetting the past is a bless from God, because it gives you the opportunity to think about on what we learn internally. So if you are still remembering the past, and this past will impact your actions now, right? And your actions now would cause you suffering. So instead of, okay, let me forget about that thing, forget about the past, let's move forward. So let me see what I learned. So let me play with my heart, let me play with my inside features, and then let me supersede the suffering by not remembering what I did wrong. So let's see one example. If you did something wrong to another person and you are very regretful about that, and you do not self forgive you on that, every time you face that person, you're going to feel badly, right? You're going to suffer by something. If you forget about that, you're going to treat the other person, and because you know that thing in your spirit, you know that thing, you're going to try to compensate that, right? And forgiveness of the past, it's so beauty. So remember the scale, the evolution scale that we presented in one slide here. So it's a one way. We are not going down. So right now we incarnated and we are in the best, in the top. So if you remember that you were in the past, probably you're gonna be you were so bad, right? So why you need to remember that you were so bad? You don't need to remember. Move forward. It's a one way. Move forward. Move forward. So this it's a bless from God. So and that's the reason we heard from our spirits friends that the line to incarnate it's so huge. It's a big line because if you are suffering the other side, look at the bless, forget about the problems and incarnate again. So it's a bless. So of course this will help us a lot in terms of suffering because if not we are going to bring all the sufferings that we had in the past to this life and imagine how many incarnations we had in the past. How many? I don't know, hundreds, I don't know. And then if you don't forget, remember you are incarnated right now with all the sufferings that you had in the past. It's gonna be a nightmare. It's a nightmare, right?
Hmm.
God bless us giving that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, well, thank you, Marcelo, for the time you took
Thank
to
you.
prepare this talk and for sharing your insights with us. Appreciate it very
Thank you, and
much.
thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate that. And anytime, so just contact me. I'll be glad to help the U.S. Spiritist. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone who watched this live and those who have been following our weekly texts, talks. Next Saturday, September 25th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, don't miss Daniel Ortiz Martinez speaking about detachment and spiritual well being. And now we're going to conclude with our final prayer. Let us close our eyes. If we can. Dear God, dear Jesus, may your peace and harmony spread to all of us. May each of us embrace inclusion over disunity. May we understand each and every day whatever struggles we are going through and how best we can make these an opportunity to learn. May we have the strength from within to overcome the challenges that we all face. May we do our best to be compassionate towards one another, the suffering of one another, as well as compassionate toward ourselves. May peace and harmony spread everywhere, and may all of us move forward in peace. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.